that article kind of touched on a lot of crazy stuff. I definitely want to dig into.
That was Gaia, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got another group of pictures that we should look at real quick.
All right, let's do it.
And some of these are a little better. Some of them are not. But we'll get a better idea of some of the carvings with these. It's just huge. The whole place is so big.
Like that. And it's well planned out. Like, you don't get walls like that by just randomly stacking stuff together.
Exactly. I think that's Klaus, whatever I said. Oh no, Harold Hauptmann. But like, look at this carving.
Like that's on par with Aztec and Mayan carvings.
It looks very similar to South American culture carvings that you see in the temples and stuff.
Like that's scary similar.
They're starting to find tools. More carvings.
Like I just want to address something real quick.
Mhm.
Like, those are flint tools. You're not getting those carvings out of flint or anything like that. Like, there has to be some sort of metallurgy going on. Like, even if it's just copper or tin.
Something, I would assume, because limestone's not real easy to carve comparatively to like sandstone, right?
Not even close.
Right. There's very obviously some planning going on in this thing.
They're so massive.
They're huge. They're absolutely huge. And it was buried perfectly, so we could just dig it up in place.
It's just weird. Like, that looks like some sort of altar.
There's a lot of theories that it when it first like came out or whatever, when they first started making news about it, they were calling it the world's first temple because that's what everybody assumed. But the more we get into it, the more curious it becomes. And I'm not sure why these little divots exist on the top of this thing either.
Yeah, those they almost look like something's supposed to be pinned there or sit in there.
Something. That guy again.
Dude, like, I don't see anybody doing that with stone tools. Like, at all.
You can see its ribs, you can see its muscle definition, you can see its whiskers in the front.
Yeah, like you need a hard chisel for that. You need a metal chisel to do that.
Something. This thing's like 18 feet tall. That handbag picture again.
Yeah,
those handbags get real trippy when you start seeing humanoids with big heads carrying them. It's just in this hill. These are the covers they put over them since.
Yeah, those are a little weird. I would expect them to have sides to stop stuff from getting in.
Just, I think it was mostly because the sun's beating down so hard, so people were having a hard time working. This is inside of it. I think actually now you can like tourist walk around these catwalks, but I'm not 100% on that. I know they like shut it down for a little while, but I think they reopened it after these structures were in place.
My mind's blown.
It's a pretty wild deal. I mean, it doesn't make any sense according to our current understanding of the world and of human evolution.
Well, I know me and you personally have had discussions about how I think the human civilization's significantly older than it is.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think it's silly to not think so.
Yeah. All right. Looks like you got something else for us.
Yeah, I got a few articles that I wanted to go over still.
All right.
I got to get to it though. There we go. So like I was saying, the world's first temple, right? And this is from 2008. So we've learned a little more, but predating Stonehenge by 6,000 years, Turkey's stunning Göbekli Tepe upends the conventional view of the rise of civilization. 6 miles from Urfa, an ancient city in southeastern Turkey, Klaus Schmidt has made one of the most startling archaeological discoveries of our time. Massive carved stones about 11,000 years old, crafted and arranged by prehistoric people who had not yet developed metal tools or even pottery. X to doubt. The megaliths predate Stonehenge by some 6,000 years. The place is called Göbekli Tepe, and Schmidt, a German archaeologist who has been working here more than a decade, is convinced it's the site of the world's oldest temple. Luton Morgan, he says at 5:20 a.m., when his van picks me up at my hotel in Urfa. 30 minutes later, the van reaches the foot of a grassy hill and parks next to strands of barbed wire. We follow a knot of workmen up the hill to rectangular pits shaped by a corrugated steel roof, the main excavation site. In the pit, standing stones or pillars are arranged in circles. Beyond on the hillside are 4 other rings of partially excavated pillars. Each ring has a roughly similar layout. In the center are 2 large stone T-shaped pillars encircled by slightly smaller stones facing inward. The tallest pillars tower 16 feet and Schmidt says weigh between 7 and 10 tons. As we walk among them, I see that some are blank while others are elaborately carved. Foxes, lions, scorpions, and vultures abound, twisting and crawling on the pillars' broad sides. See, it's pretty close to Syria.
Yeah.
Schmidt points to the great stone rings, one of them 65 feet across. This is the first human-built holy place, he says. From this perch, 1,000 feet above the valley, we can see to the horizon in nearly every direction. Schmidt, 53, asked me to imagine what the landscape would have looked like 11,000 years ago, before centuries of intensive farming and settlement turned it into the rough, nearly featureless brown expanse it is today. Prehistoric people would have gazed upon herds of gazelle and other wild animals, gently flowing rivers which attracted migrating geese and ducks, fruit and nut trees, and rippling fields of wild barley and wild wheat varieties such as emmer and einkorn. This area was like a paradise, says Schmidt, a member of the German Archaeological Institute. Indeed, Göbekli Tepe sits at the northern edge of the Fertile Crescent, an arc of mild climate and arable land from the Persian Gulf to present-day Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, and Egypt, and would have attracted hunter-gatherers from Africa and the Levant. And partly because Schmidt has found no evidence that people permanently resided on the summit of Göbekli Tepe itself, he believes this was a place of worship on an unprecedented scale, humanity's first cathedral on a hill. With the sun higher in the sky, Schmidt ties a white scarf around his balding head, turban style, and deftly picks his way down the hill among the relics. In rapid-fire German, he explains that he has mapped the entire summit using ground-penetrating radar and geomagnetic surveys, charting where at least 16 other megalith rings remain buried across 22 acres. The 1-acre excavation covers less than 5% of the site, he says. Archaeologists could dig here for another 50 years and barely scratch the surface. Göbekli Tepe was first examined and dismissed by University of Chicago and Istanbul University anthropologists in the 1960s as part of a sweeping survey of the region. They visited the hill, saw some broken slabs of limestone, and assumed the mound was nothing more than an abandoned medieval cemetery. In 1994, Schmidt was working on his own survey of prehistoric sites in the region after reading a brief mention of the stone-littered hilltop in the University of Chicago researchers' report. He decided to go there himself. From the moment he first saw it, he knew the place was extraordinary. Unlike the stark plateaus nearby, Göbekli Tepe, the name means belly hill in Turkish, has a gently rounded top that rises 50 feet above the surrounding landscape. To Schmidt's eye, the shape stood out. Only man could have created something like this, he says. It was clear right away this was a gigantic Stone Age site. The broken pieces of limestone that earlier surveyors had mistaken for gravestones suddenly took on a different meaning. Schmidt returned a year later with 5 colleagues, and they uncovered the first megaliths, a few buried so close to the surface they were scarred by plows. As the archaeologists dug deeper, they unearthed pillars arranged in circles. Schmidt's team, however, found none of the telltale signs of a settlement, no cooking hearths, houses, or trash pits, and none of the clay fertility figurines that litter nearby sites of about the same age. The archaeologists did find evidence of tool use, including stone hammers and blades. And because these artifacts closely resembled others from nearby sites previously carbon dated to about 9000 BC, Schmidt and co-workers estimated that Göbekli Tepe's stone structures are the same age. Limited carbon dating undertaken by Schmidt at the site confirms this assessment. The way Schmidt sees it, Göbekli Tepe's sloping, rocky ground is a stonecutter's dream. Even without metal chisels or hammers, prehistoric masons wielding flint tools could have chipped away at softer limestone outcrops, shaping them into pillars on the spot before carrying them a few hundred yards to the summit and lifting them upright. 7 to 10 ton stones. They're going to just carry them a few hundred yards and lift them upright. With no wheels, by the way.
Allegedly.
Then Schmidt says, once the stone rings were finished, ancient builders covered them over with dirt. Eventually, they placed another ring nearby or on top of the old one. Over centuries, these layers created the hilltop. Today, Schmidt oversees a team of more than a dozen German archaeologists, 50 local laborers, and a steady stream of enthusiastic students. He typically excavates at the site for 2 months in the spring and 2 in the fall. Summer temperatures reach 115 degrees, too hot to dig, which is probably close to 40 Celsius off the top of my head. In the winter, the area is deluged by rain. In 1995, he bought a traditional Ottoman house with a courtyard in Urfa, a city of nearly 500,000 people, to use as a base of operations. On the day I visit, a bespectacled Belgian something. Why is that in my way? How do I get rid of it? Okay. Doesn't look like
we're going to have to talk after the show. I got to get you something better so we can read articles for real.
Fair. Pile one. Joris Peters, an archaeozoologist from the Ludwig Maximilian University. Oh, there it goes. A bespectacled Belgian man sits at one end of a long table in front of a pile of bones. Joris Peters, an archaeozoologist from the Ludwig
Words is hard.
Maximilian University in Munich, specializes in the analysis of animal remains. Since 1998, he has examined more than 100,000 bone fragments from Göbekli Tepe. Peters has often found cut marks and splintered edges on them, signs that the animals from which they came were butchered and cooked. The bones, stored in dozens of plastic crates or stacked in a storeroom at the house, are the best clue to how people who created Göbekli Tepe lived. Peters has identified tens of thousands of gazelle bones, which make up more than 60% of the total, plus those of other wild game such as boar, sheep, and red deer. He's also found bones of a dozen different bird species, including vultures, cranes, ducks, and geese. The first year, we went through 15,000 pieces of animal bone, all of them wild. It was pretty clear we were dealing with a hunter-gatherer site, Peters says. It's been the same every year since. The abundant remains of wild game indicate that the people who lived here had not yet domesticated animals or farmed. But, Peters and Schmidt say, Göbekli Tepe's builders were on the verge of a major change in how they lived. Thanks to an environment that held the raw materials for farming, they had wild sheep, wild grains that could be domesticated, and the people with the potential to do it, Schmidt says. In fact, research at other sites in the region has shown that within 1,000 years of Göbekli Tepe's construction, settlers had corralled sheep, cattle, and pigs, and at a prehistoric village just 20 miles away, geneticists found evidence of the world's oldest domesticated strains of wheat. Radiocarbon dating indicates agriculture developed there around 10,500 years ago, or just 5 centuries after Göbekli Tepe's construction. To Schmidt and others, these new findings suggest a novel theory of civilization. Scholars have long believed that only after people learned to farm and live in settled communities did they have the time, organization, and resources to construct temples and support complicated social structures. But Schmidt argues it was the other way around. The extensive coordinated effort to build the monoliths literally laid the groundwork for the development of complex societies. The immensity of the undertaking of Göbekli Tepe reinforces that view. Schmidt says the monuments could not have been built by ragged bands of hunter-gatherers. To carve, erect, and bury rings of 7-ton stone pillars would have required hundreds of workers, all needing to be fed and housed. hence the eventual emergence of settled communities in the area around 10,000 years ago. This shows sociocultural changes come first. Agriculture comes later, says Stanford University archaeologist Ian Hodder, who excavated Catalhoyuk, a prehistoric settlement 300 miles from Göbekli Tepe. You can make a good case this area is the real origin of complex Neolithic societies. What was so important to these early people that they gathered to build and buried the stone rings? The gulf that separates us from Göbekli Tepe's builders is almost unimaginable. Indeed, though, I stood among the looming megaliths, eager to take in their meaning. They didn't speak to me. They were utterly foreign, placed there by people who saw the world in a way I will never comprehend. There are no sources to explain what the symbols might mean, Schmidt agrees. We're 6,000 years before the invention of writing here, he says. There's more time between Göbekli Tepe and the Sumerian clay tablets etched in 3300 BC than from Sumer to today, says Gary Rolfson, an archaeologist at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington. That's fun to say. Who is familiar with Schmidt's work? Trying to pick out symbolism from prehistoric context is an exercise in futility. Still, archaeologists have their theories, evident perhaps of the irresistible human urge to explain the unexplainable. The surprising lack of evidence that people lived right there, researchers say, argues against its use as a settlement or even a place where, for instance, clan leaders gathered. Hodder is fascinated that Göbekli Tepe's pillar carvings are dominated not by edible prey like deer and cattle, but by menacing creatures such as lions, spiders, snakes, and scorpions. It's a scary, fantastic world of nasty-looking beasts, he muses. While later cultures were more concerned with farming and fertility, he suggests perhaps these hunters were trying to master their fears by building this complex, which is a good distance from where they lived. Daniel Stordier, an archaeologist at the National Center for Scientific Research in France, emphasizes the significance of the vulture carvings. Some cultures have long believed the high-flying carrion birds transported the flesh of the dead up to the heavens. Stordier has found similar symbols at sites from the same era as Göbekli Tepe, just 50 miles away in Syria. You can really see it's the same culture, she says. All the most important symbols are the same. For his part, Schmidt is certain the secret is right beneath his feet. Over the years, his teams found fragments of human bone in the layers of dirt that filled the complex. Deep test pits have shown that the floors of the rings are made of hardened limestone. Schmidt is betting that beneath the floors, he'll find the structure's true purpose, a final resting place for a society of hunters. Perhaps, Schmidt says, the site was a burial ground or the center of a death cult. The dead laid out on the hillside among the stylized gods and spirits of the afterlife. If so, Göbekli Tepe's location was no accident. From here, the dead are looking out at the ideal view, Schmidt says, as the sun casts long shadows over the half-buried pillars. They're looking out over a hunter's dream. So let's move into a little more recent, shall we?
Let's do it.
This was written in 2020. Still excavating Göbekli Tepe. What's been most recently discovered? Göbekli Tepe might be one of the most significant discoveries the world has ever known. Located in the southeastern Anatolia region of Turkey, we know. So it reveals truth the ancient world previously never considered. Many artifacts and ancient ruins that reveal itself. We've read a lot of this, so I'm going to try to kind of skip over some of it. Explain more about it every single day. So hundreds of obelisks have been unearthed. Pretty much everyone in the scientific community agrees that Göbekli Tepe is an important site to learn about. Part of the reason for this is because the findings at the site challenge so many prior thoughts about ancient civilization. Much of the ruin has shown itself in recent years, but much is still to be unearthed. Recently, hundreds of obelisks have been discovered, making the science community wonder just what the site's purpose indeed was. 15 mega monumental temples were uncovered a few years back. It seems like temple after temple is being recovered from Göbekli Tepe. The excavation process of the area continues to reveal clues to the past that force scientists and archaeologists to reassess what they had previously thought. Judging from all that has been revealed, more findings at Göbekli Tepe will continue to be unearthed, helping create a clear picture of an ancient civilization. The oldest temple in the world sits here. Talk about a significant find. Göbekli Tepe is currently the oldest temple in the entire world. The site, which sits in the country of Turkey, is roughly 11,000 years old. It is thought that this temple was created as a place to worship dog star Sirius. So much regarding this area is still a mystery, but with every finding comes new theories and questions about humans of the past. Many sites within the primary site keep popping up. Göbekli is not one single large place of worship, but rather many small areas or geological surveys. There are roughly 20 of these circles and some 200 pillars at the site. With every excavation period, more of the fascinating ruins springs forth. It wasn't until 96 that the scientific community took the area seriously, and much more still sits under the earth. In the end, many more circles and spaces of worship could see the sun. Göbekli challenges thoughts on beginnings of agriculture. The findings of this Turkish site are not only physical discoveries, the space is challenging initial thoughts regarding the beginnings of agriculture and settlement. The temples are thought to be 11,000 years old, predating cities and agriculture. Before Göbekli Tepe, researchers thought complex civilization and religion occurred after the development of agriculture. This ancient site suggests that hunters and gatherers who came here depended on agriculture to sustain and support their gatherings, meaning agriculture was occurring earlier on than thought. Lots of bones lie on the ancient earth. Recently, archaeologists uncovered several skulls at Göbekli Tepe. 3 craniums, each with deeply chiseled markings, were found at the site. The bones are the first of their kind to be discovered in this region, as they seem to have deliberate puncture wounds in them, not made by animals. Before the intact skulls were found, researchers had gathered thousands of animal bones and hundreds of bone fragments around Göbekli Tepe. New findings point towards skull cults. The skull fragments that have incisions in them, unrelated to animals, are making many in the scientific community wonder if Göbekli Tepe was a hotspot for bizarre rituals or even grounds for a skull cult. The skull bones also show evidence of being defleshed following death. One of the skulls had a hole in it that had previously been filled with a pigment called red ochre. All of these signs point towards some sort of fascination with heads by these ancient people. Artifacts discredit prior ideas on when pottery and tools were initially introduced. Göbekli Tepe was constructed in the pre-pottery stage. In fact, it stood before the invention of the wheel and writing. With only 5% of the site unearthed, so much remains unknown for now. Little evidence of home life has been found. No bowls or pots for cooking, but tools had to be used here. The site would have required some 500 men to move and manipulate the large stones. Tools would have been needed to chisel and create the discoveries found. Artwork at the site leads toward a possible headless fascination. Recent discoveries allude to the idea that skulls played some sort of part in the religion or worship of the ancient people who graced Göbekli Tepe. Some researchers are adamant that these people had a thing with headlessness. Aside from skull fragments, who doesn't? Aside from skull fragments found at the site, depictions of people carrying skulls, headless humans, and headless statues have also popped up at Göbekli Tepe. Were the people who roamed this region into beheading in the name of belief? Hunters and gatherers might not have been as nomadic as previously thought. During that particular period, humans were thought to be solely nomadic. This place begs the question, were humans during this period more advanced in civilization than initially assumed? To build this massive place of possible worship, hundreds of people would have had to stay there, work, rest, and eat. Aside from this, researchers continue looking into the possibility that groups of people stayed in communal buildings during their time at Göbekli Tepe.
Do you have any of the photos of the headless statues? I kind of want to see those and that kind of art, because
I don't think I have pictures of the art, but I do have a bunch of stuff on the skulls. So this is some PhD that I